There's nothing more powerful and epic than a hasted max level wizard nuking countless enemies in Baldur's Gate 3. Or is there? Well, what if we're nuking those enemies without blowing our party up? Forgive the short intro, it's a rather long video with all of the spells that we have to cover. So let's get right into it. As level 1 wizard, we'll get 3 cantrips, we'll get to choose 6 spells, we'll also get to select our ability scores as well as proficiencies. You'll gain an action here called Arcane Recovery, and don't forget that you have this. A lot of people forget that they even have this at all. This is very useful for prolonging the wizard and allowing you to do more battles or even more things outside of combat with your spell slots before needing to rest. Arcane Recovery basically will replenish spell slots while you're outside of combat up to 5th level spells, so very handy. For cantrips, I would recommend taking Friends. If you don't have this already, you'll gain advantage on charisma checks against non-hostile creatures. This does have the ability on Tactician to make them accuse you of enchanting them, which just kind of adds to the overall story in the playthrough as well. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if you have this already covered by somebody else, feel free to choose a different cantrip. Shocking Grasp. This will give you essentially a melee version of a cantrip. In case you're unable to get to range, you'll have a slightly higher chance to hit by using this. Also, the damage of this scales fairly well for a cantrip as well. Later on in the game, this will actually do decent damage if you happen to be in melee range. Ray of Frost, and I prefer this one because it has the same range as the fire version. However, this will also reduce the target's movement speed by 3 meters. So overall, I just find this a little bit more useful. For spells, there's a number of spells that you can choose from, of course, as you'll see here. I would recommend starting with these, and again, if you have some of these covered, you may not need them. Magic Missile, very useful for all levels of the game. This will actually scale with the ability to have more missiles as you continue to level up. It has a 100% chance to hit. I've said this often in many of the build guide videos, but there aren't a ton of ways to ensure that you automatically deal damage. So if you're trying to finish off one or more targets, Magic Missile is an excellent choice. Shield, very strong. This is probably the strongest level 1 spell in my opinion. When you're about to be hit by an enemy, you can increase your armor class by 5. Also, you'll take no damage from Magic Missile if you use this. This is incredibly nice because it's a reaction, which means that you can see what the enemy has rolled and then decide if you want to use this. It will also last for the entire turn once you use it. So the earlier you use it in regards to that turn, the more benefit you may get from additional creatures and so forth. On top of all that, you actually get to see what ability they're trying to land on you as a target, so you can decide if it's even worth using the shield or wasting that spell slot. Thunderwave, a little bit of utility here. This is nice for a couple of reasons. One, you can knock enemies down, causing them to cause extra damage if they're dropped down to a lower level. But on top of that, this can create separation from you and these enemies as well, allowing you to move around. And you actually have surprisingly decent mobility as this character. And a couple of these other spells, you'll see that. For example, Long Strider, which is going to increase a creature's movement speed by 3 meters, lasts until long rest. This is actually a ritual, so if you have this learned, you can just cast this on your entire party. Very useful spell to have. I would recommend having this covered by either this character or another character in the party, because there's no reason to not have this applied to all characters. Featherfall, a utility spell here. You and your nearby allies gain immunity to falling damage. This will allow you to jump to different positions, travel around in certain areas that you might not otherwise. Overall, very useful. Another spell I'd recommend having covered by one member. You don't need this on multiple characters, so if you have this covered, certainly take a different spell as well. Expeditious Retreat. This allows you to gain dash immediately and as a bonus action on each of your turns until the spell ends. This is a concentration spell, so just keep that in mind. You can only be concentrating on one spell. However, this lasts until long rest as long as you maintain that concentration. We don't have a ton of options for bonus actions with this character, so this is just a nice means of giving us much better movement speed in all of our turns as long as we maintain that concentration. For ability scores, I would go with this particular loadout in regards to Dex, Con, and Int. For Strength, Wisdom, and Charisma, you'll have to pick one to drop down to 8. For Dexterity, we're going to bump this up to 16. This will give us a solid initiative as well as additional +3 to our armor class. And when we're choosing between having higher armor class or an extra hit point per level, I would definitely recommend the armor class for this particular character. Avoiding the damage is much better than your ability to tank or soak the damage. So for that reason, I would pump the Dexterity up higher than the Constitution. For Intelligence, I would push this to 16. Now, if you're planning on using the Hair of the Hag for this character, you can certainly push this to 17. And then when you get to your feats, you'll be able to make another choice with one of your feats instead of needing to use ability improvement twice to bump this up to 20. Keep in mind this character overall can actually reach 22 intelligence once you use the Mirror of Loss as well. Wisdom and Charisma would just remain neutral. This just helps with our saving throws, ability checks, and so forth through the game. Skill proficiencies. This character actually has access to a lot of proficiencies that you can choose from. I would personally recommend taking some that use the intelligence stat, but as always, you can certainly select whichever are the most useful for your particular playthrough. As level 2 wizard, we'll get to select our subclass. For the sake of this guide, we'll go with Evocation. However, all of these are viable. You can be any of these that you like. They all have different advantages, and none of them really have any disadvantages. Evocation will essentially allow us to create pockets of safety, and this means that allies will automatically succeed saving throws against spells and take no damage from them. This is only if they're evocation spells, so keep that in mind. You can't just cast a conjuration spell and be immune to it for allies, but overall this has a lot of use. This is Gale's default, so we'll go with that for the video here. You'll get to pick up 2 more spells to add to your spellbook. I like taking Ice Knife. It's a decent AoE, especially for a level 1 spell, as well as Enhanced Leap. This is useful out of combat, and you can choose to prepare this when needed, as opposed to always having it prepared. At this point, we'll be able to prepare 5 spells. I'd recommend Magic Missile, Shield, Thunder Wave, Longstrider, and Expeditious Retreat. Level 3 Wizard will gain access to 2nd level spells. Here I would recommend picking up Cloud of Daggers, a very powerful AoE for this level. This will leave a lasting cloud of daggers that spins around and does decent damage for this particular level. Often you can use this to create a choke point and just force enemies to run through it, dealing massive amounts of damage to them. Mirror Image is the second choice. This is just a huge boost to our armor class, useful from the start of the game to the finish. For prepared spells at this point, I would put both of those spells in. You'll have limited level 2 spell slots. Remember that you can restore a spell slot out of combat, so you will be able to make use of both of these spells, even if you don't do it in the same battle. Level 4 will gain another cantrip, 2 more spells, as well as our feat. For the cantrip, personally I like to pick up Light here. This has some uses throughout the game and even synergizes with certain items in the game. For spells, I would pick up Misty Step. This is a tremendous boost to our mobility, allowing us to get to high ground without the need of jump. So very useful, works as a bonus action as well, meaning you can teleport there and then cast a spell as your action. For the second slot, you can really decide based on what else you have in your party. Hold Person is very useful, especially if you're playing with melee. This will allow you to hold them where they can't move, and attacks within 3 meters are always critical hits, giving a huge boost to hard-hitting melee users in your party. Enlarge Reduce is also useful because you could either choose to boost an ally's potential damage or reduce that of an enemy. Knock if you happen to be playing without anybody that has sleight of hand or thieving skills, and also Shatter is a decent AoE. For the sake of this guide, I'm just going to select Shatter, but those 4 are all strong candidates in my opinion. For prepared spells at this point, I wouldn't change a whole lot. I would personally still keep in Misty Step just in case you need it, and you'll make more use of Misty Step the later the game goes and you have more level 2 spells. And like I said, you'll basically be pairing Misty Step to position yourself and then nuking. For feat, I would go with Ability Improvement, and this is to boost the intelligence up to 18. Level 5, we'll get access to level 3 wizard spells, and for those 2 spells at this point, I would select Fireball as well as Haste. Fireball is an evocation spell, meaning we can just cast this on our own party. Have you ever seen the enemies group up so perfectly, but be unable to cast it for fear of damaging your own party members? Well, not an issue with this subclass. Additionally, Haste is a concentration spell that will allow yourself or an ally to gain an action, move more, and harder to hit for 10 turns. Incredibly strong spell. If this concentration is broken, you'll become lethargic and essentially lose a turn, so just be aware of that. For prepared spells, I would put both of the level 3 spells in, and again, we can replenish one of these outside of combat, so even though you might not cast them in the same battle, you could still certainly make use of one or both before you rest. And overall, I would use Magic Missile, Shield, Longstrider, and Expeditious Retreat for level 1. For level 2, I would take Cloud of Daggers, Mirror Image, and Misty Step, and for level 3, Fireball and Haste at this point. Level 6, we'll add 2 more level 3 spells. I like to select Counterspell as well as Animate Dead. Counterspell is very nice because you can prepare the spell and choose whether or not you want to use it at all, because it's a reaction. Animate Dead, summons are just incredibly powerful, and whether you're playing with Necromancy, subclass, or not, summons in general are just very strong in this game. The more bodies you can add to the battlefield, the better off you'll be. Now, you don't always have to have one of these cast and walking around with you, you could choose when to use this if you're somebody that doesn't like dealing with all the summons on a regular basis. But when the time arises and you need it for an upcoming battle, or you're having difficulty, you can add some corpses or even use some of the other summon spells that we'll get later on. That means for prepared spells at this point, I would just put in Counterspell. I would leave off Animate Dead for when you need it, like I said, but Counterspell you can have prepared, ready to go if needed. Otherwise, you can just not use it. As a level 7 wizard, we get access to level 4 spells. For these two choices, I'd pick up Ice Storm. Has a massive AoE radius. On top of that, it leaves ice on the ground, meaning that targets can slip and fall prone as they walk through it. Very strong overall, and can lead your party for some amazing setups to take out enemies before they reach you. Conjure Minor Elemental for the same reason we took Animate Dead. Summons are just incredibly powerful. For the prepared spells at this point, I would swap out Expeditious Retreat. As nice as it is, we actually have more powerful spells at this point, and we have additional spell slots to make use of Misty Step, so we can kind of use that to get by. In terms of what we want to put in, well, we put in the level 4 spells, Ice Storm and Conjure Minor Elemental. Level 8 will gain 2 more spells, as well as another feat. I like to take Dimension Door at this point. This is essentially just an improved Misty Step where you can teleport yourself and one ally, not just a party member, but an ally. So if you're playing with another ranged character, you could teleport them to a favorable position. If you're in a battle with allies, you can teleport them to safety, and so forth. I also pick up Phantasmal Killer. This is just an incredible single target ability. It does 4 to 40 psychic damage per turn. The target can no longer move and will be easier to hit. For prepared spells at this point, you'll only be able to put one of those new spells in. Personally, I like to use Phantasmal Killer in place of Shatter at this point. I just find that this build lacks the ability to nuke single targets in the same manner that it does AoE or multiple enemies, as you can see with things like Clouded Dagger, Fireball, so forth, even the Shatter that we moved out, Ice Storm. So I like to have at least one dedicated single target spell. On top of this, for our next feat, we'll take Ability Improvement and boost that intellect to 20. Level 9 Wizard will bring access to level 5 spells. Conjure Elemental for the same reasons that we took the Minor Elemental, just having additional bodies, and the Elementals at this point are very powerful, essentially almost as strong as some party members perhaps. Cloud Kill, an incredible spell as well. This uses concentration and you can reposition it every turn, dealing 5 to 40 poison damage per turn. Just absolutely an enormous amount of damage to all the enemies on the battlefield with a huge AoE range as well. For prepared spells, I would put both of the level 5 spells in. At this point, your loadout for level 1 spells will look like Magic Missile, Shield, Long Strider. For level 2 spells, you'll have Cloud of Daggers, Mirror Image, Misty Step. For level 3 spells, you'll have Fireball, Haste, Counterspell. For level 4, be using Ice Storm, Phantasmal Killer, and the 2 level 5 spells, Conjure Elemental and Cloud Kill. For level 10, we'll gain a subclass feature, which will actually add our intelligence modifier to damage rolls with any evocation spell. Another cantrip. Personally, I select Mage Hand at this point. I don't think there's that much of a strong influence from any choice that you pick here at level 10. For spells, we'll get 2 more. I like to pick up Cone of Cold. This is an evocation spell. Not only will it benefit from the passive that we just got, but in general, being an evocation spell, we can just nuke anything we want with it. We don't have to worry about if we have party members in the way. Just fantastic when everything's grouped up, enemy and ally alike. In addition, I actually pick up Greater Invisibility, and this is a level 4 spell. I just want to make note of that. And that's not because the level 5 spells aren't good. It just has to do with the number of spell slots we have. So in general, we just have the ability to cast more of the lower level spells, and I find I get a little bit more use. And the other level 5 spells we have with Conjure Elemental, Cloud Kill, and now Cone of Cold are all just so powerful that we're often casting these over and over as opposed to using a different one. Level 11, we'll get access to 6 level spells. I would personally pick up Chain Lightning and Sunbeam. Both of these are evocation spells, just so you're aware. Chain Lightning will strike an enemy and then leap to additional targets. This will also benefit from the passive we got a couple of levels ago. Sunbeam, this is usable for 10 turns. So you just get an enormous amount of damage from this turn after turn, which makes it an incredible 6th level spell. For prepared spells at this point, I personally only put 1 in. Again, this just has to do with the limited number of spell slots. I will put Chain Lightning in on the following level. Level 12, get a pair of spells again, as well as our final feat. For the spells, I like to select Wall of Ice. This has incredible zoning potential, especially as an evocation subclass. You can raise a wall of solid ice that deals 10 to 60 cold damage to anyone standing in its way. We also have the ability to deal an additional 10 to 6 damage conditionally, and it won't deal any damage to your own party. So just absolutely amazing for when you want to get something off and position yourselves in a manner that nothing else can get by. Create Undead. Again, just summon spells are so powerful. This is the reason we take this here. This can be cast to raise a stronger version of the Animate Dead. For prepared spells at this point, I actually swapped Chain Lightning in, which we learned at the previous level, but ultimately at this point, you have access to so many powerful spells. Depending on the rest of your party, you may have some personal preferences or choices here. For feat, I like to select Warcaster. We've picked up a number of concentration spells, especially some higher level ones, and there's nothing worse than having that interrupted. So I want to make use of the Warcaster to help maintain that concentration. Additionally, the reaction you get for Shock and Grasp if something moves out of melee range does considerable damage at this point for a cantrip, so keep that in mind. Wizards don't require any specific items to function, which is great. As the vast majority of their power lies within their spells and spell slots, anything that boosts or recovers these is very beneficial. But in general, there's a number of things you can choose from. This is one of the best scaling classes in the game, and you'll have no issues becoming powerful. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.